Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us today. We have a very busy day today. We're going to preview what we are going to be covering later on next week. Also, what we are going to cover today, and talk about a lot of special segments and special stories for the day. But I do want to preview what is going to happen next week. As you know, this whole week we've been doing a replay of the Quentin Tellis case, and the reason we have been doing that is because we anticipate that in the 2018 term, we will see a retrial of Quentin Tellis in connection with the murder of 19-year-old Jessica Chambers, who was brutally killed. She was burned alive. We are going to replay that case for you today. Keep on playing it. But don't worry, because starting next week, we are planning on covering a new trial. A new trial. We expect jury selection beginning on Monday. We expect the trial to begin maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. This is a case out of Florida. It's a case out of Titusville, Florida. And a man is accused of shooting to death two neighbors and nearly killing a third, and this again is going to be headed to trial next week. This is the case of William Woodward. He's 49 years old. He is charged in the 2012 Labor Day shooting deaths of Gary Lee Hembry and Roger Pecor, and the attempted murder of Timothy Blake outside his home on Smith Drive in Titusville. Now, what makes this case very unique is not only is the state seeking the death penalty, but the defendant in this case is trying to argue this was a justifiable homicide. We're going to have more details about this case as we cover it next week, but we wanted to preview that for you now. Also, we're trying to get into a couple of other trials beginning next week as well. We know you want those new trials. It is 2018. The courts are starting to come back, and as soon as we do have a live feed in those courtrooms, we'll make sure to go to it. But today, aside from Quentin Tellis, we have a day full of special segments. In fact, this morning, we're going to cover a lawsuit against Motel 6. We are going to cover a white firefighter who is suing a city for racial discrimination after he got fired for social media posts about him attacking or threatening to attack Black Lives Matter protesters. Then we're going to turn over to Connecticut. The Supreme Court there may decide whether to review Michael Skakel's conviction. If you remember, he is the nephew of both Robert and Ethel Kennedy. We're going to talk about engagement rings and conditional gifts. The hashtag #MeToo evolves into hashtag Time's Up movement. Work from home and home as a workplace. That dichotomy we're going to talk about later on in the day. And then all this week, as you know, we've been in the Brevard County courtroom, the bond court hearings. When people are arrested, they're brought before the judge to determine issues of bond. We're going to continue that live stream. Then we're going to close out the day with the discussion about Jeff Sessions and the marijuana laws that are taking place all across the United States. And then, this is, I can't even believe I'm saying that, there is actually a legal fight over who gets Charles Manson's body. So think about that one for a second. We're going to be covering that later on in the day. And then finally, we're going to close out the day with a case about, or a situation about U-Haul threatens a veterans group. So as you can see, we have a lot of special segments today, a lot to cover. We thank you for joining us here. And we want to start with this Motel 6 case. And I want to just tell you what has been happening in this case. This is a case where the Washington Attorney General, his name is Bob Ferguson, he's filed a lawsuit against Motel 6. And he alleges that motel employees gave private information about thousands of guests to U.S. immigration agents, ICE agents. And these agents, they didn't have warrants. That's what he says. He says they didn't have warrants and that they singled out guests with Latino-sounding names. In fact, he told reporters, Mr. Ferguson told reporters, that Motel 6 employees provided the names, birth dates, driver's license numbers, license plate numbers, and room numbers of more than 9,000 guests to ICE agents. This is a really, really interesting case that just came down the pipeline. So I want to talk about this case with our guest for the morning. Very excited to have him on. We have criminal defense attorney down from Florida, Mark Eiglarsh. Mark, great to see you here on the program and great to finally be on here with you.
Jesse, pleasure to be on. Thank you, my friend.
And I am a little jealous that you're down in Florida and we're here up in the Northeast. Not a lot of fun. I'm jealous of you, but
Jesse, we've got to wear a sweater this morning. It's brutal.
Oh, I feel so bad for you, Mark. I feel so bad for you. But let's talk about this Motel 6 case. What is going on here? Why did this happen? How is it possible that the Motel 6 employees could provide all this personal information to ICE agents who didn't even have warrants? Why did this happen?
Why they do it? Because they're stupid. I mean, why they do it? They were intimidated. They crumbled. Maybe they were, right-wing government supporters that wanted to ignore both state and federal law. I don't know why they did it, but it's frightening. And worse is this feels like Nazi Germany, because what they did was they lined up all the guest names and apparently, allegedly, circled all the ones that had Hispanic sounding last names, and then they did a search on those people. That's problematic. And Jesse, for those who are thinking, well, I'm not Hispanic, this doesn't pertain to me, you should be extremely concerned that they're giving out private information, period. This needs to be dealt with very severely.
And were they going towards Motel 6 because apparently, and the way they justified this, I'm talking about the ICE agents, is that apparently gang affiliations, there's things that happen at motels, they stay at these motels, deals are happening at motels. Why go to a Motel 6 out of all places? Why this chain?
Well, you mentioned it. They're looking to get their biggest return on their investment of time. So Motel 6 is not the Four Seasons, and they're thinking that there's more Latinos that they're going to be able to get. Look, I don't care what their motivation is. You don't respond to something unlawful by saying, well, we had good intentions. That doesn't do it for me. You do something unlawful like this and you got to pay for it.
So what are the exact laws that Motel 6 would be in violation of, and what kind of penalties are they looking at?
Well, there's state law that they violated. I mean, there's a Privacy Act which precludes specifically the very conduct in which they engaged. There's also the Consumer Protection Act. It's unfair and deceptive business practices for them to do this. The penalties, they're looking at attorney's fees, they're looking at fines, things like that.
9,000 guests information? Yeah. I can't even believe this number. I mean, this happened. I can't even explain it.
That's just what we know about. Is Motel 6 the only hotel that crumbled? And by the way, we're burying the lead. The biggest crime regarding Motel 6 is the thread count or lack thereof on those sheets. Literally sandpaper, Jesse.
Well, that's a whole separate issue.
The whole thing. We don't have time for that this morning.
Maybe they'll throw that into the complaint. We talked about this yesterday. You file a lawsuit, who knows what you'll throw in there. But yeah, you make a good point.
My face is still recovering from just laying down on the bed. But I digress.
No, it's an important issue, and I'm glad we're talking about it. No, but the thing is, what's scary here is these agents, they didn't have warrants. So right. What I found also interesting is that ICE isn't a defendant here. It's really Motel 6. Why not go after the immigration, the agency, and why not, will they go after them later on?
I've said it before, I'll say it again. If it was easy to sue any governmental/law enforcement agency, they'd all be bankrupt. There, I said it. So you're not going to get anything. The burden is so high, and it's very difficult. And Motel 6, deep pockets. Motel 6 is defending and saying, we just had a couple of knuckleheads at some local places that did this. And I think that the evidence is proving that it was systematic within Motel 6. It wasn't just restricted to a couple of knuckleheads. And my question is, what other Motel 6s are out there? What other private businesses are giving out our private information? Again, if you don't have Gomez, Gonzalez, or Rodriguez as a last name, you're still not safe. I guarantee you it wasn't just Latin names that were given out. And you don't stay at Motel 6, well, you stay somewhere else This concerns me that in a free society where laws are supposed to protect us, government agencies are ignoring those very laws and getting private information about their citizens. That cannot happen. We have to take a stand against it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, people that have been rounded up because of this private information gathering, haven't they been deported, or are there attempts to have them deported as well?
Yes. And they're not going to go get them back, Jesse.
It's really, it reminds me a little bit of what happened during World War II with Japan. And, you get into these situations where you start rounding people up by a single identity. It's scary. It's scary to talk about.
I say Germany, you say Japan. I think they're both fair metaphors, and I'm concerned about it.
Now let's talk about, you mentioned it. Is this a pattern? Is this isolated? Like you said, Motel 6 seems to be trying to say, oh, you know what? This was at the local level. The senior management didn't know this. But when this lawsuit continues down the pipeline and you go through discovery and you see these communications, what do you think they might find here? Because you tell me what you've made of this damage control that they did. In September, Motel 6 issued a directive to every one of its more than 1,400 locations, making it clear that they're prohibited from voluntarily providing guests information to ICE. Now, that's damage control. What do you think is really going on here?
I think that their lawyers are going to meet with the opposing attorneys and say, how big does a check need to be? We need to make this go away. We need to make Mark and Jesse stop talking about this, because when people have choices, and they do, as to where they stay, they can go to the other Fleabag motel and they won't go to Motel 6. And so, we have a better chance of our information not being released if we go somewhere else, is the thought process potentially of the average consumer now. So they want to get this out of the media. And so I think they're sitting down and writing a check. What they don't want, I'm glad you brought it up, they don't want discovery, because you start digging, right? All of a sudden you start taking depositions. You find out that Motel 6 wasn't being credible, and potentially that this was systemic, and then it keeps it in the news, and then the damages are even greater.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate because we got a great criminal defense attorney with us. If you were in the position to provide advice to Motel 6 as a defense, what possible defense could they come up with? I see they're kind of doing a flavor of, oh, it wasn't us, it was the local level, but what kind of defense would you come up with here?
First, I love that you flipped it, because I get to play the other side. That's nice.
That's why we love having you on. This is the Law and Crime Network. We have time to talk about both sides.
I love it. Okay, so first I say, look, just because John Doe at the local Phoenix Motel 6 screwed up and was intimidated because he has a ghost in his closet and he saw government agents and he didn't want to mess with them, he just gave the information, doesn't mean that our fine, wonderful, higher thread count than Eiglarsh alleged corporation is systemic with problems in giving away your personal information. It's safe to stay at Motel 6. It's just a couple of knuckleheads, and we're going to solve that problem for you.
Right. You mentioned it before. It's maybe they were intimidated. Federal government, federal agents come in, they get in. You don't ask for a warrant. You might not even know who you're hiring. I don't know who the Motel 6 employees are.
Let me tell you something. Every day I'm sitting down with new clients, and I'm always asking them questions, and I try to do it without judgment. Judgment is the thief of serenity. But I try not to make them feel bad, because they already gave statements to law enforcement that seem to really hurt their case. And I ask them, like, why? Why'd you admit that you did this? Whatever. These agents are trained in the academy on how to get information. They do it physically, they do it emotionally. So when someone comes into a Motel 6, this guy would have to be, he'd have to have balls that a wheelbarrow would have to hold to say, get out, I'm not giving you the information. It's not his place, he's working there. He's gonna give up the info. Here, you want? Take the computer yourself. That's what these people are gonna do.
Now, we have to speak about the large elephant in the room here, and this really isn't this the larger discussion about the sanctuary cities issue? Isn't this really what this is all about in terms of the cooperation of local agencies, local authorities, local businesses in helping federal agents try to find illegal immigrants? Isn't this part of the larger conversation?
Yes.
And what do you think about it?
And if I'm in-house at any corporation, I sit down immediately and I make sure I send out a memo saying this is how we're going to do this thing. Absent a subpoena, we're not going to give up anything. Do not give up anything. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you say. Here's my telephone number. You call me immediately. Don't be nasty to the agents. Say with utmost respect, I'm happy to cooperate. However, I've been informed that I have no authority to give you anything. Let me call Mark Eiglarsh, my local attorney, and he'll tell me what to say. Then Mark Eiglarsh gets on the phone, as I've done in the past, and I say, with utmost respect, Mr. Officer Unfriendly, please remove yourself from the premises. We're respectfully going to decline your invitation to give out any information about our cherished guests.
And that I would love to see. That I would love to have on the program.
Right,
now,
right.
okay, we know the Washington Attorney General has filed suit. We know that based upon what we've talked about this morning, Motel 6 is in hot water. But this doesn't prevent any of the people whose information was disclosed. Couldn't they file lawsuits?
They could, but as you know, civil lawsuits are all about damages. So I get calls all the time. I do personal injury. I do cases like this. I said, well, putting aside the challenge in proving this, let's, again, because there's always proof issues. Nothing is cut and dry.
Sure.
But let's go right to it. Let's say we can prove that they screwed up, that the government, that they called the government and said, hey, do you want our lists? Which didn't necessarily happen. But let's say, here, we want to give you our information because we want to curry favor with the government. Let's say they did something that egregious. The question is, well, what are the damages? What happened? You know, if somebody's here illegally and then they were deported, you argue, look at the impact it had. But if they're here illegally and they should have or could have been deported, you know, one would argue that was just inevitable. And it's very difficult. You spend a lot of time, money, and energy, and you may not get a nickel.
So in other words, just disclosing information in general, that's not per se a damage. You need something a little bit more. How was it disclosed? Who was it disclosed to? How did it affect you?
I think so. I think that the government having information about you, you know, well, I lost sleep over it. Well, only in movies and TV does that lead to recovery. In the real world, I'm not sure that most attorneys would even take that case.
You speak about emotional distress, kind of. We're going to talk about that because our next case is about a white firefighter who filed a racial discrimination suit. Mark, stand by. We're going to go to a quick break. We're going to show a clip from the Quentin Tellis case. And when we come back, we're going to have Mark Eiglarsh talk about this next case that is going to be pretty unbelievable to believe. It's a white firefighter suing a city for racial discrimination after he got fired for social media posts about running over, or I should say, threatening to run over Black Lives Matter protesters. Stand by, Mark. We're going to talk about that in a minute. In the meantime, here are some clips from the Quentin Tellis case.